Hello, I'm Chief Inspector Al Wescott, and thanks for joining us for our third video where we focus on different elements and topics concerning domestic abuse. Today we're focusing on male victims of domestic abuse, and we'll be talking about the barriers men face when reporting and the support services available to them. When we hear the words domestic abuse, many people's minds jump to a picture of a violent incident which has taken place between a female victim and a male perpetrator. Maybe a husband and wife, girlfriend and boyfriend, or ex-intimate partners. I'm sure many people would also think of violence being involved as well, like someone having cuts and bruises or a black eye, or broken bones, or even more serious. While abuse can certainly be physical, it can also be emotional, mental, sexual, financial, or someone controlling your actions through their own coercive and controlling behaviour. And whilst it's fair to say that a large proportion of the cases we investigate do involve women as the victim of abuse, it's not exclusively the case. The simple fact is anyone can be a victim of abuse, and that includes men. Men in heterosexual relationships, same-sex relationships, trans men, men in relationships with trans men or women. It doesn't have to be intimate relationships either. Men can experience domestic abuse within family relationships also. Men of all ages, all backgrounds and all professions can all be affected by abuse. It may surprise people to know that 1 in every 6 to 7 men in the UK have experienced domestic abuse in their lifetime. That's compared to 1 in 4 women. So male victims are not unusual or uncommon, they're just hidden. So no matter who you are, experiencing abuse and making the decision to come forward and get help is a huge step. Please be assured, myself and my colleagues at North Yorkshire Police do not underestimate the courage and bravery it takes to pick up that phone and make a report. Everyone who decides to make a report has a barrier to overcome. Fear of repercussion, fear of what the future may hold, or the criminal justice process which you may never have experienced before. Men face those same barriers, but perhaps experience a further pressure from thinking that society will judge them as being weak for being in the situation that they're in and being a victim. Let's face it, we see it on TV, ads, films, conditions us to think men should be strong, confident, dominant and able to defend themselves. Definitely not a victim. But in reality, we know that that's not the case. Men are human and vulnerable and just likely to be physically and emotionally hurt, manipulated, belittled, humiliated, controlled by an abusive partner. But there are a unique set of social pressures which stop many men from reporting the hell they live on a daily basis. That's why we're here today making this video. We want to remove some of that stigma men who are living with abuse may feel, and encourage them to come forward and report it. Both our police officers and domestic abuse officers have a wide experience of helping many people from lots of different backgrounds. So please don't think we cannot help you because of your gender, or for that matter because of your race, your religion or sexual orientation, your age, or if you're a transgender individual. We're here to help you and safeguard everyone. We're really fortunate to have someone here today who's been brave enough to agree to speak to us as a police service about his experience and the barriers that initially stopped him reporting the abuse that he was subject to for many years. Hi Paul, thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us.
Hi, yeah, my name's Paul Chivers. I live down in Wiltshire and I am a survivor of domestic abuse and violence. I guess in my case, I experienced the best part of 10 years of domestic abuse and violence. I got married to a fellow teacher, and everything seemed quite rosy and happy. And you know, when you're in love and married, everything's through these rose-tinted spectacles. And And hindsight is a really valuable tool to many of us. But I mean, I think there were some warning signs pretty early on that things weren't quite right. And over time, once we were married, then we fell into a pattern where, well, I was forced to fall into a pattern where gradually I was isolated from some of my best friends. I was isolated from family then. It was an incredibly difficult time, and I can actually relate to many people out there, and men in particular, that find themselves in a situation like this. And it is a hole that is incredibly difficult to dig yourself out of. And I found it incredibly difficult. I mean, I allowed it to continue for 9 to 10 years, and people ask me, well, why? I've been asked that question so many times, and there's a question that is asked, why do you stay? My main reason for staying was my daughter. I mean, she was a very impressionable child, and obviously as you grow up, you actually see things that your parents do, and you actually wonder whether or not that's acceptable. I was there to actually say to my then 3 or 4 year old daughter, that's not normal. That's not normal at all. That's not normal behaviour. And I just felt that if I left the family home, I would be in a situation where I guess she would be more open to extreme behaviours and perhaps think that they were normal. On top of that, the major factor why I stayed was I'm afraid I have no confidence whatsoever in family courts in this country, and giving fathers, the right to see their children as often as they want to, or full custody. But as it happens, I do have full custody. Over a period of time, systematically, you're ground down by your partner. You're not yourself anymore. I wrote a song a couple of years ago. I'm not that musical, but I wrote a song called Looking for Me, because I basically had lost the essence of me during those 10 years, because you're conditioned. You're coerced into doing so many things that you would normally find as unacceptable, like blanking your own parents because it's a case of it's either them or me type situation, and also behaving in ways that you wouldn't choose to behave. You're actually towing the line, walking on eggshells on a regular basis, and just doing what the other person wants you to do, just to maintain some sort of equilibrium, some sort of balance in your life. And even though it isn't, it's extreme. And that was always at the forefront of my mind, to make sure my daughter knew that she was loved, that she knew that I was there to support her, those sorts of things. But I mean, the whole thing, escalated and got worse and worse. The verbal abuse, the humiliation. I mean, things like, bizarre things like being left in the middle of nowhere about 75 miles from home, and it sounds strange, but you give up your keys, you give up your wallet when you're asked to give them up, because your daughter's in the back of the car very upset, and you're just left in the middle of nowhere to find your way home with no money, no phone, and that sort of behavior is just so typical. But people say, well, how did you allow it to happen? It's because you're conditioned, brainwashed almost, if you like, to behave in a certain way, to be subservient to that person's wishes. So the thing is that everything came to head, I guess, and quite literally, when my wife attacked me one Sunday evening. That was about 6 years ago, with a hairdryer, swinging it on the flex, round and round, and just hit my head to begin with, and then basically repeated hits, even when I was on the floor, to the head, which basically meant that I was sort of scalped from about this point here backwards, so all the skin was hanging off of my head on the top, and so covered in blood. And when you're in those situations, and if anybody watching this has had a sort of head injury, you'll know how much blood is coming out, and it's actually like a fountain almost. So my natural reaction that night was to wrap my head in a towel and get in the car and go down to A&E. I wasn't phoning. The thing is, the normal thing to do would have been to phone the emergency services. But even at that point, you're still conditioned to try and keep it hush hush behind closed doors, because you've been conditioned to think that way. That even though, even though your head is, gaping open, you still have the forefront of your mind that you've got to behave in a certain way. In fact, goodness, I ended up going to A&E, because if you've ever been to an A&E, it's not express service. I really support the NHS, but I did sit there for about 4.5 to 5 hours trying to keep my head together, quite literally. But it gave me time to think, and definitely time to think about all of the impact, not only on me, but more importantly on my daughter. And I mean, several weeks prior to this, I'd had a painting smashed over my head and cuts to my head and my hands, and I'd gone into work, and one of my best friends and colleagues at work said to me, "Paul, what's it going to take for you to actually leave? Is it going to take for you to end up in hospital or end up dead?" And it was obviously it was getting to that point, and that was the turning point. That was the obvious turning point in my life, that things needed to definitely change. So what did I do, though? Even though it was imprinted in my mind that this is what I was going to do, I think I was in A&E until about 4:30 in the morning, Monday morning. I returned home, and during that night, my wife had made my daughter sleep in our bed with her, surrounded by blood-soaked covers, carpet. My blood was everywhere. She hadn't made any effort to clean it up or anything like that, and she'd made my daughter sleep in that as well. So this is one of the reasons why I kept returning, because that's just not normal behaviour. But again, I wasn't completely free at that point, because I was still repeating the pattern of going back home. But out of the best reasons, really, because I wanted to see that my daughter was okay. And it was Monday morning, so my daughter came down first, and she was dressed for school, ready to go to school. My wife came down after her. She was dressed, ready to go out to work, like nothing had happened at all. When she saw that I was in the house, she picked up a cat bowl and hit me over the head, even though I told her I'd been to A&E and had all of these staples put in my head, and just hit me again, and then went to get the iron that I'd left out from doing the ironing the day before. And again, it was on that occasion, again, it was my daughter who said, "No, mummy, don't do that." And the night before, what had saved me from being beaten to a pulp on the floor by my wife and her hairdryer was, again, shouts of my daughter saying, "No, mummy, please stop, stop, stop." I do feel an element of guilt, obviously, because it wasn't only me being sort of exposed to this, it was my very young daughter. And there's that thought about no thought for anybody else's needs other than her own. And that, again, that is a trait of perpetrators of domestic violence. Okay, they don't give a flying toss about anybody else's feelings or the impact that their actions will have on them at all. And again, I mean, from my own experience and speaking to other people, that is a sort of common trait, really. If I just say, so I mean, I reported it to the police the following day, and I'd also spoken to social services as well, because obviously I was concerned about my daughter's safety in the home. Both agencies, before I even gave a statement, they said, "You've got to get out of that house." So I did. I took my daughter with me, and there's no refuge for men where I live. No refuge for men. Luckily, I've got a network of friends, friends that I had let off steam to over that period of 10 years. That I couldn't keep it all in. It's impossible. If you do, then you're going to become another statistic of suicide. I think you've got to find some way of actually letting that steam out of the bottle, if you like, and just finding a way. And there are a number of ways that I'll talk about in a minute. But as far as, you know, when we actually think about, you know, turning points and where you're going through from there, I'd spoken to both agencies. We got out of the house. We were out of our home for about, I guess, 4 days. I went to live with a friend of mine. I didn't think it'd be an obvious address for my wife to think of. Obviously, she did bombard my parents with hassle and things like that. But I mean, we just needed to go somewhere that's safe. If I hadn't had that sort of network of friends, I wonder what would have happened to us, to be honest with you. Because nobody was jumping forward to actually help us out as far as that regard was concerned. And I do feel for anybody that's in a situation where they don't have people to go to, and you're male and you've got a child, there's a limited option available. When I spoke to the police, I mean, I'm a teacher and I've been teaching now for about 28 years. And I deal with lots of different children and also lots of different types of adults. But my experience of the police was just talking to the local bobby that would come into school and things like that. I never really had experience of going to the police station, let alone giving a statement. I think my statement, once I got in there, it took about 6 hours. So, you know, you're shattered anyway. You've got this blow to the head, and you're giving those statements. I mean, they gave me, you know, some breaks and drinks and things like that. But I mean, I was just shattered at the end of it. And one of the things that I am really extremely grateful for, and will always be grateful for, was the sort of police officer that was assigned to our case. And I'm going to mention her name because she needs to be mentioned. Her name's Louise Connelly, and she works for Wiltshire Constabulary. I couldn't have actually wished for a better officer in charge of the case. She said there are all these different agencies, but basically she became all those agencies. She was so excellent at giving advice, pointing me in the right direction, encouraging me to set up a cocoon around us once we got back into our home, so that all the neighbours, front and back, either side, knew what our situation was and would keep an eye out. Because the bizarre situation was, it took the best part of 6 months for my wife to actually be charged, and then it took 12 months for the case to get to court. And you know, I don't know whether that is atypical or not, whether it's because I was a male, or I really, you know, the whole experience for me has been eye-opener with regards to the way in which people have fixed views on things, and equality as far as men are concerned. When we're domestic abuse and violence, we're way behind the game on it, and thank goodness for, you know, charities like the ManKind initiative, because it is forging ways forward to actually make people slightly more aware of what the situation is. Kind of use ManKind before, during and after the events that I've just described, and each time they were always there to listen. That phone line for me wasn't just a phone line, it was a lifeline. And this is why now I work for them, and I use my personal experience to talk to people like you. They've supported me not only as a charity, as a victim and a survivor, but they've also given me a lifeline, in the fact that I now work for them. I'm a trustee, and I take that very, very seriously, and I feel quite honoured to be offered that position as well, because there's got to be a voice out there. And sadly, although there are victims, not many of us want to talk about it. And I don't think if that's still a man thing. The outcome was that my wife was found guilty of grievous bodily harm and common assault. So it was for the GBH for the attacking the Sunday night, and then for the repeated hitting over the head with a cat bowl the next morning for the assault, I guess. So she was found guilty and unanimous and given a 16-month sentence. 50% of that was done in prison, and the other 50% out on license to the probation service. Life for us now is so much better. We're not constricted, we're not walking on eggshells. We've done, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've gone on lots of trips abroad, different experiences, because I've tried to build good memories for my daughter, who's now 16 years of age. She's had to go through the whole bit of not doing her GCSEs and is now moving on to college, but she's doing very well and very happy. And I continue to teach, and I continue to find other avenues. We just got a golden retriever puppy. He keeps me busy. And I'm back in touch with many of my friends, and most importantly, my mum and dad and my brother, my other extended family that I see on a regular basis, who I'd been isolated from for a very, very long time. I'll just leave on one thought. If you find yourself in a situation like mine, okay, you're not weak, you're incredibly strong, because you've had to face so much rubbish in your life, to be coerced to do things, not to be isolated, to have your money controlled, a number of things where you aren't behaving, you're not being you, okay? And those events that happen, that shake you, that upset you, that scare you, and you're not ready to go, okay, that's fine. But don't let those go by the wayside. Do what I did, keep a diary. For my diary, it went back for about 9-10 years of different instances, and it made it very easy for me to go back to the police and say, look, this happened on this date, and then look, find if there was an email trail to go with it and those sorts of things. But it just keeps you a log. So if you end up in a situation where you do need to go to the police, you've recorded everything at least. And it does help you, just by getting it down on paper or on the computer, it just does sort of get it out of your system a little bit. Also, on top of that, make sure you've got at least one friend, a confidant that you can talk to and get all this stuff off your chest. And also try and keep that person as far away from your other half as much as possible, because they will infiltrate and they will try and separate you from anybody that they perceive as being a strong link, if you like, for you. And one last thing, and I'd like to say, you know, I am a human being. I am male, and I am a survivor of domestic abuse and violence, and I feel as though I need to be treated as equally as a female survivor, and we're working on that, and we're working towards that. So if you're watching this and you're in a similar situation, you don't necessarily have to get in touch with people straight away, but make sure you're talking to somebody and keeping a record of what's going on. And also, if you want to, pick up the phone and phone the ManKind initiative. They don't ask any questions, they just sit and listen, okay? And that really helps. So hopefully that's been useful today.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing your story with us. I realise talking about your own personal experience of abuse and violence is not an easy thing to do, and we are really appreciative of your input and your time taken today. So thank you so much, Paul. So we've heard from Paul. Now we have Marilyn Selwood joining us from ManKind, which is a charity who solely support male victims of abuse. Marilyn, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
Marilyn, you work directly with men who have experienced abuse, and when you speak to them, what do you tend to find are the barriers for them coming forward?
I think there are sort of four main barriers really. So the first one, and probably the biggest one we find affects male victims, is masculinity. So what men think they should be behaving like. So if they are experiencing domestic abuse or sexual abuse in any way, they feel that actually that they're perceived to be weak, or that people won't believe them if they disclose that they are experiencing abuse. I think the other things are sort of public policy and stories, so how men as victims don't really fit into what we believe to be that profile of a victim. We look at things like lack of provision, so there are far less services for male victims of domestic abuse throughout the country than there are for females. And whilst we recognise that, you know, there are more female victims than there are males, we do know statistically that, you know, 1 in 6 men will experience some form of domestic abuse in their lifetime. So that's a large proportion of the population that will need some support, and that's lacking. I think the other part of it is about societal belief systems, really. So about how we bring our young boys up compared to how we bring our daughters up within society, and how they should behave. So we expect men to be providers and protectors. We expect them to be resilient, when actually that's the total opposite of what we see or perceive a victim to be like.
That's interesting. That, would you say then there was a typical male victim, or do you help men from lots of different types of backgrounds?
There is no stereotypical male victim at all when it comes to the men that we support within our service. So there's, you know, it doesn't matter how old they are, what background they come from, their ethnicity, their gender, sexuality, it doesn't make any difference at all. So there is no stereotype for a male victim. It can affect absolutely anybody from any walk of life.
Okay, so could you talk us through the kind of support ManKind can offer to men who are living in abusive situations? Yeah. And how someone could get in touch with you?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we're a national charity, so we cover the whole of the UK. We have a helpline that runs Monday to Friday 10 till 4, where men, their families, friends, colleagues, all professionals can phone through for support, for signposting. So we're like a central point of call, really, so they can speak to specialist trained advisors who can reassure them that they're not alone, that they aren't the only person to be experiencing this type of abuse, but also to signpost them to specialist services, so services in their area, depending on what type of abuse they're experiencing, but also national services that might support them. So, for example, if a man comes from is gay, bisexual, transgender, they may prefer to speak to somebody like Gallup or the LGBTQ+ Foundation, who have a specialism within that area. People who experience, for example, honour-based violence may want to go to somebody like Karma Nirvana. So there are various different organisations in addition to ourselves that have specialisms. So it's about speaking to somebody. Actually, I think for the majority of men that phone through to the helpline, they just want to be heard and they want to be believed. We have quite a considerable proportion of our men that are reporting parental alienation, so where there's issues around child contact after the breakdown of a relationship and they're being prevented from seeing their children, but also men that just want to make sense of what's happened to them and want to hear that actually they're not alone, and actually what they're experiencing is abuse. So sort of confirmation of what they're telling us, really, and what they can do about that.
That's really informative, Marilyn.
We do have obviously other parts of our charity, so we also do campaigning. We work closely with other organisations to raise a profile for male victims. We deliver training and that type of stuff as well. And also we have a really comprehensive website, so if men themselves want to go on and have a look at other male victim stories or where to get support, that type of thing, that's all on there. But there's also lots of services and links on there for professionals who want more information, who may want statistics and training and that type of stuff that we offer.
Okay, that sounds absolutely fantastic. I think for me, what would your message be to a man living with a domestic abuse relationship who may be watching this video?
I think the biggest thing and the bravest thing that person can do is to reach out. Don't be afraid that you won't be believed, particularly with the police. You know, we work closely with police forces all over the country, and the police are listening and they are there for you. So speak out, reach out, and don't be afraid to seek support. You will be believed. I think that the second thing really is to stay safe, particularly in these times with COVID, when people aren't always able to access the services that they may have done previously. Stay safe, put yourself together a little safety plan, and you know your abuser better than anybody. You know how they work. So work on a safety plan to keep yourself and your children safe if you have children, and to reach out to the police and other support services such as ourselves if you're in need.
Thank you for your wonderful input today, Marilyn. It's hugely appreciated. I hope this video has provided some insight into how we would support any man who is brave enough to come forward to report violence, and the support that is available to you. Please don't be deterred to make a report. The statistics show many men are living in this situation, and you would not be the first to report domestic abuse to us. If you choose to make a report, you will not be judged and you will be believed. If it's an emergency, you can make a report to police. Please always consider as well, if you are not in immediate danger, to consider calling 101. If you do not want to talk to police, please seek help and support from another agency, much like what Marilyn has mentioned today. And please visit North Yorkshire Police website for details of any organisations who can help you. Thank you so much for watching, and please take care.